So I gave my life to Jesus in 1995, and pretty quickly after that, there was this pressure to share the gospel and evangelize. And honestly, for a lot of those years, I felt like an absolute failure. And I think I felt like a failure because there's this pressure to sort of close the deal, whatever that means. To be the person that leads someone through praying the prayer, to accepting Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, to doing that prayer after explaining the gospel message to them. And I think when that's the goal or the target we're shooting for, I think what it does, one, is it ignores what's going on in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, but also it makes Christians like me feel like I have been a failure. Even if I was sharing the good news with people around me or participating in things that led to people eventually becoming Christians, I wasn't the one to close the deal. I wasn't the one, to borrow sales vocabulary, I wasn't the one who made the sale. I have a whole nother video that kind of deconstructs why that sales angle is wrong. But because of that, I felt like I guess I'm not good at evangelism. I guess I just don't have the gift of evangelism. That's not part of my calling or my story as a Christian because I haven't ever done that. But what I want to do is I want to show you that I think that being the only goal is misguided. And I want to show you that there are other goals that are a part of evangelism that you might be participating in and you need to be encouraged. So I'm going to explain to you Paul's metaphor that he uses in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And then I'm also going to give you a few metaphors that have been helpful for me in being I'm still participating in the evangelism business, even if I'm not guiding someone through the sinner's prayer on the steps of a church service or out on the streets like a street evangelist of some sort. So first, 1 Corinthians chapter 3 by Paprika. Starting in verse 5, Paul says this: "What, after all, is Apollos, and what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe." Evangelism, right? "As the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will each be rewarded according to their own labor. For we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building." And so he's addressing controversy that has to do with people being like, I'm on Apollos's team and I'm on Paul's team. And Paul's like, hey, we're all working towards the same goal. And he even highlights that each of them is a person that was on the path to believing, to trusting Jesus. And I think that this idea that effective evangelism is getting a person to say the sinner's prayer is much more reflective of sales capitalistic culture than it is of what's in the Bible. Paul's like, hey, we're helping people in a process to trust Jesus, to believe. And he goes agricultural. So if you're in an agrarian culture of some sort, then maybe that really hits for you. You're like, yeah, I've grown something from seed, and you got to plant it, you got to take care of it, you got to do the fertilizer, you got to do the water, you got to give it the right sunlight, and then that thing grows. And I'm doing my job, but it's really God that's doing the growth. And I think that's a beautiful metaphor. And if you're agrarian, then that's metaphor number one. Trust Paul's metaphor and realize that maybe your job is watering, fertilizing, providing proper sunlight and nutrition, and that's your jam. But in my experience, there have been a few other more specific metaphors that help me identify different ways that I participate in the evangelistic endeavor, sharing the good news with people. The first one comes mostly from the apologetic space, and I think I got this metaphor originally from Brett Kunkel or my friend Gabe Pagel. I can't remember who told it to me first, but it's this idea about putting a stone in someone's shoe. Because especially if you're doing the apologetics thing, let's say someone is antipathetic, they are not friendly with Christianity at all. Usually a conversation with someone who is an atheist or someone who is deeply entrenched in a whole totally different worldview, you're not going to leave that conversation. They're going to be like, well, will you show me how to accept Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior? Usually it ends with all right, I guess we agree to disagree, and then you move your separate ways. But the image that I was given is that it's about putting a stone in someone's shoe. Provide a piece of data, a piece of evidence, maybe a thought for them to chew on. That's muddling the metaphor. That's not what I meant. Essentially, the stone in the shoe thing, it works like this. Maybe I should get a shoe. My wife's shoe is the closest, but like if when you're running on like a rocky trail, if there's like a rock that gets in here, I mean you're running along. I'm a great actor, I know. And there's a stone in there. Eventually, like there's a while where you can tolerate that stone being in your shoe, but eventually it comes to the point where you're like, okay, I have to take off my shoe and be like, let's get that rock out of there. I need to actually analyze the shoe that I have been running in. And that's the first thing, is maybe your job is simply to put a stone in someone's shoe so they can actually pause and analyze and think about what they think about things. A lot of us, we come preloaded with our assumptions. We think that we have the right answers. And so sometimes in a conversation with a person, your job is just to be like, let me put a little stone in your shoe. There's a little thing about like maybe the reliability of the gospel accounts, or maybe there's a little thing about like how did the Big Bang start, or whatever. Just enough so that a person is like, okay, let me pause, and maybe in that conversation, it won't even bug them at all. But like 3 days later when they can't sleep, they might be like, man, this thing's been itching for the last 3 days. Why don't I take off my shoe and think about it? Why don't I like consider, how did this all get here? And maybe that awe and wonder I experience when I look at the universe is like indicative of something bigger than my naturalistic perspective. So maybe that's a more reasonable goalpost than like leading someone through the sinner's prayer. Hey, did you put a rock in someone's shoe? Another helpful metaphor for me is tipping the scales. I don't think I have any of these kind of scales, but this isn't going to work perfectly because my hand is not a completely stable surface, but like, I got my little kitchen scale here, and like, if you've ever done a recipe, you know how you're like, okay, make sure that you have 4 ounces of sugar. And like, you start pouring in a little sugar, and then you see the numbers tick up. Just because, like, if you do this and it's not quite at 4 ounces doesn't mean that you didn't contribute to getting towards the 4 ounces. And it's the same thing when it comes to evangelism, with like helping people come closer to knowing and trusting Jesus. Maybe that act of kindness just took them from like 1.1 to 1.2. Or maybe you sharing that like really meaningful thing that you got from that sermon last Sunday with your friend at work, like only made them go from 1.2 to 1.4. Just because they didn't give their life to Christ in that moment, just because it wasn't 4 ounces in that moment, doesn't mean that your contribution isn't actually helping tip the scale more towards them actually trusting Jesus. So that's just the thing with evangelism, is every act of kindness, every good argument for the existence of God, every meaningful conversation where you stayed civil but still stood for truth, and every time you were open and honest and shared something that was going on in your life and what God's been doing, every time you dispelled one of those presuppositions that people have about those evil, hypocritical Christians, and you were like the good, shining example of a Christian, every single time it's tipping the scale more and more in a person's life to be able to maybe one day trust Jesus. Just because you're not at 4 ounces now doesn't mean that you didn't contribute. And so keep doing the thing. Keep sharing goodness, being loving, modeling the kindness of Christ, because that's part of the evangelistic endeavor. And the last metaphor, we've got tipping the scales and putting rocks in shoes. And the last one is like this. This is my approximation of a spectrum. If we're redefining successful evangelism, let's imagine that the alphabet is laid out on this stick. You gotta use a lot of imagination, and over here is A, and over here is Z. When you are coming into contact with another person who has not trusted Jesus, let's say Z is being like, I want to give my life to Jesus. Some people are over here at A. They're like, I don't even think there is a God and there is no meaning to life. Sometimes a meaningful evangelistic conversation is just getting them from A to B. That like, maybe there is something more than just the material universe. Maybe it is a good thing that I am alive. And maybe like some people are over here at J and they need to get to K, and some people over here at P and they need to get to Q. But your job in evangelism, like Paul says, like some people water, and like plants take a long time to grow. Maybe your job, as you share good news with people, as you live and show kindness and love to people, is just to get them to the next letter. Are they at S? Get them to T. And like, even as I'm thinking about this, like I feel like a spectrum is a little bit too linear. Life is typically not linear. There's usually like people as they move along, they're like, oh, and then they're here, and then they're here, and then they're here, and at least I guess in my own experience, I have found that sometimes when I have been here and it seems like I've been taking steps back because like there's been difficult moments or whatever, like all along I've been like progressing towards this goal of knowing and loving Jesus. And so maybe your job is just to get them the next step, whatever that looks like. And you won't get them the next step unless you actually meaningfully contribute. If you don't like share something with them, if you don't show kindness to them, if you don't give them a listening ear and show them compassion when they're going through something difficult, your job, and this is like so important, is not just to like, I know I've said this a bunch of times, it's not just to like close the sale or like to make them say a certain prayer. Your job is to introduce people to Jesus so that they would want to be in a relationship with them. Or to put it in Jesus' words at the end of Matthew, he says, like, go and make disciples. A disciple is a student who dedicates their life to following a person. This isn't a thing that happens in one conversation where you sell them on wanting to make a purchase. This is something that like takes time to develop and grow so that they're like, yes, I want to turn my life over to this beautiful thing that is this Jesus that I have been convinced of and have fallen in love with. So if you know that is the end goal, is a relationship. Like even the goalpost, it's not like they prayed the prayer, done, check. No, the goalpost is like, hey, I want you to start a relationship with Jesus so that thing can persist and continue to go on. And like after Z, there are more letters after Z that so that you can like continue to grow in your faith and closeness with Jesus. It's not just making converts, it's growing disciples. So hopefully I've helped like maybe redefine what success looks like in evangelism. Hopefully reducing the pressure so you don't feel like you gotta get here to Z every single conversation, but also emphasizing the fact that like, guys, it's work. You got to keep pouring out more to tip the scales. You got to keep putting rocks in people's shoes and like helping push people further along that spectrum. Because like Paul says, we are co-workers in God's service. And so let's do our job so that God can do his.